I got the 120 volt warm white packages. It came in a big bundle. The bundle was a little manhandled, but you know, they, as you can see, inside the bundle, a couple of them were mushed a little bit, but seemed to get shipped reasonably quickly from here in the United States. So here's the front of the unit. As you can see, just a standard LED inside, and you can see the power supply housing here in the rear, and there's a gap with some small fins between. So here's the breakdown. The rear housing has a flexible silicone seal on it, and the gland itself also has a silicone seal on it. The front, this is the front housing with this is the board I'm going to be putting in it. The front housing here also came with a silicone seal, and this is a glass lens. It's not plastic, so it is a glass lens, and the reflector is very, very thin, but that's pretty much what I expected. In the power supply housing was this, and it fed these two wires through this hole, and then there's one underneath here, which I'll show you in a minute, up to this LED, which had heat conductive compound, thermal compound on the rear of it, which I scraped off and put back on the package here. And due to the size limitation of this housing, I had to go back to my board here, and I had to solder, instead of as per Rob's instructions, his had the LED soldered to the top of the board. I unsoldered it, and I soldered it to the bottom of the board, as you can see, lowering it. When it was soldered to the top of the board, this heat sink here was pretty close to flush with the bottom of the board, and with the soldering bits over here, that was going to contact the aluminum, the back of the aluminum housing here, and I was afraid we're going to end up with a short. So I moved it to the bottom of the board, elevating the board slightly, and then after, out of just a cooking sheet, a cutting sheet here from the dollar store, I cut out a small piece of the cutting sheet here, which will insulate the board. And as you can see here, from the bottom of the LED here, this is the one supplied by Rob, and then here's the one that was originally in the housing. And as you can see, the footprints are exactly the same. I mean, the width and height are exactly the same. So that worked out very well. So the board here will drop in, and the way the other one was mounted in here, there was a screw here in this corner, and then a screw here in this corner. Obviously the LED here, when it was originally in here, was mounted like this, you know, the old LED. It was mounted in horizontally like this, with the wires going through the hole here and the hole here on opposite sides. That's obviously not going to work with this board here. So I'm going to have to end up drilling out this hole to enlarge it slightly so I can get ground, V+, and the data in lines and data outlines over to here. I haven't quite worked out that part yet, but this mounts quite well. Okay, I've got the two screws back in here, and I put them back in the original hole here and here that they came out of. And these are the original screws that came with the board, or it came with the floodlight, which oddly enough, every single one of them that came with this thing have a bevel on the back, even though it's not appropriate for the job, but it is what it is, I guess. So there's the board mounted, and then I'll flip it over here and show you the rear here. Okay, here's the rear of the unit, and I'll remove the cap as I did before. And originally, you know, this power supply here is literally, it's just laying loose in here. It's not attached in any way. The ground from the 120 volt in was simply tucked under one of these screws. So here I'll remove the last screw that was holding this in place and pull the panel off here. And even though these screw holes don't go all the way through, they still put silicone rings inside them here. And then these two are the feed holes, as you can see right here. Let me get this picked up here. As you can see, this hole and this hole are the feed holes that go through with power into the LED chamber. This one looks plugged because the board is there and is completely unusable with that board there. There's no way to get a wire through that. So I'm left with this one. And I don't know if when I drill this out I'm going to have enough material left around the circumference here to matter or not. So what I may end up doing is drilling this out and putting a piece of nylon tubing through, and then using epoxy or silicone seal around that hole on that side, and leave it the same height here, and it should seal against the rubber gasket here. And then inside, once this is placed back on top, I can bring in the two in and out pigtails here and do the pigtail bridging here with just the wires running through to the other side to feed this individual board it's in this flood. So as you can see, it's very, very much smaller than what I had imagined. I thought this thing would be at least several inches larger squareness wise. Alternately, I may leave the back power supply panel completely off and epoxy fill this area and put a couple of cable glands directly on it. But the time's kind of growing short here, so I suspect I'm probably going to end up using that power supply box and simply drilling this piece out to get enough wire through for the 4 leads that I need to supply the board. As you can see, the board fits very tightly in here, and once I flip the LED to the bottom side of the board here, that essentially raised this board in relation to the back plane here. So I had to dimple this shield a little bit where it contacts these inductors right here. But as you can see, once I bend it slightly, it sits in there quite nicely and centers perfectly. So this should seal back up without a problem. So there's a look at this housing. I'll put a link in the description to the eBay link to these. The reason I ordered these particular ones, because the 12-volt ones I assumed wouldn't have much of use inside them, and would have been just, I probably would have ended up with a bunch of these chips with, you know, not much else going for them. As it was, these 120-volt ones were actually cheaper than the 12-volt ones, and I got the LED driver from 120 volts, which it doesn't have a plug on it, but big whoop. So I got the LED driver and the warm white LED to boot. So maybe I can mount these on some aluminum C channel or a piece of L channel for heat dissipation. Mount 2 or 3 of these in a line and use them maybe for under cabinet lighting, or maybe here on the bench, or maybe out in the garage. So I at least got something that I might be able to, you know, to use out of this instead of just scrapping it completely. So I think it was it'll be worth it getting the 120 volt version here over the more expensive 12 volt. So there you go. There's a look inside.